Tonight, Supreme Showdown. Christine Blasey Ford says she is willing to testify about Brett Kavanaugh, just not on Monday, as Republicans are demanding. We've got the very latest on this fast-moving fight and what it could mean for everyone involved. Plus, he was former Cuomo aide, one so close he was known as the third Cuomo son. Now Joe Percoco, he's headed to prison for half a dozen years. Will this finally scare Albany into straightening its ways? Plus, we will wade into the complicated debate over standards at New York's Jewish religious schools. Are politics and political power trumping basic education standards, and are kids suffering as a result? Evening, everyone. I want to mention that today will mark the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Maria slamming into Puerto Rico and claiming more than 3,000 lives. We'll be talking about that later in the show. Good evening. Welcome to RFL. I am Richard French, and thank you for joining us on this very busy Thursday evening. Now, it remains the biggest drama in the nation this evening, with a Supreme Court seat hanging in the balance. So, will the woman who has accused court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault, will she testify before Congress? Now, we know tonight that Christine Blasey Ford, she does want to testify, but we still don't know if she will. We also know that Republicans in the Senate want this nomination wrapped up as quickly and painlessly as possible, and they want Kavanaugh on the high court. Now, we don't know if that will happen either, but we do know the timetable that the GOP would like to keep. Tomorrow, Judge Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, that's the day that he has given for a deadline for Ms. Ford, 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, to agree to testify and to submit her opening statement in writing. That deadline, as best we know, that remains in place tonight. Then, Monday morning at 10 a.m. is the time that Grassley has scheduled the hearing with Ms. Ford and Mr. Kavanaugh and no one else. Ford, through an attorney, saying today she does want to testify and is willing to testify next week, but will not do so on Monday. So we wait to see how this plays out. Grassley has also said he still wants the Judiciary Committee to vote on Kavanaugh next Thursday. Again, that's a week from today, but a vote, he said, could happen even sooner if Ms. Ford declines to testify after all. We're going to see what happens with this deadline as well. So a lot of moving parts. Now, the final key date, I should say, that's not changing. As all of this happens with the midterm elections approaching very fast, now just 46 days away. And so tonight will be another anxious evening on both sides of the Kavanaugh confirmation process as the Senate and the nation waits to see what happens next. Protests against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh took over Capitol Hill.
We believe Dr. Blasey!
Demonstrators targeted the offices of Republican lawmakers on the Senate Judiciary Committee. GOP Senate leaders giving Kavanaugh's accuser, Dr. Ford, until Friday morning to say if she will testify on Monday.
And we're not going to cancel any hearing until the last minute.
Ford's attorney says Monday is not possible, but she would be, quote, prepared to testify next week, and senators must offer terms that are fair and which ensure her safety. Ford has been demanding the FBI investigate her claim that Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her when they were in high school in the 80s. Her lawyers saying a hearing that has only 2 witnesses is not a fair or good faith investigation.
She is asking the FBI to investigate her claims. She is asking for that kind of review, that investigative work, that oversight, that accountability, because she's telling the truth.
Kavanaugh, who was spotted back at the White House Thursday, denies the allegation.
Don't mess with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford.
Alumni from Ford's private high school in Maryland delivered a letter of support signed by 1,000 women to lawmakers. Democratic senators are hoping the FBI's involvement will shed light on the alleged incident from nearly 40 years ago. Now, both the White House and Senate Republicans continue to reject Mrs. Ford's calls for the FBI to investigate her claims. So the question is, what will happen if Ford does testify, and what is at stake for the Republicans who might question her, if in fact they even do the questioning? Now, I pose these questions and more to ABC News political director Rick Klein. Let's say Dr. Ford decides, I'm going to show up on Monday and I'm going to testify. Do you have clarity at this point what that would look like? I know Senator Collins said that, each should be afforded to have an attorney who would do a cross-examination. Others have pointed to, if it's going to be a public hearing, it'll be done differently. How would it even work if it happens?
It's going to look basically like other committee testimony would, which is to say that it's an individual at a table answering questions directly from senators. There is no other process that's been set up. In fact, it highlights how little progress has been made since 1991. Anita Hill faced the same kind of questioning from senators directly. Whether or not the Senate is equipped to deal with this, of course, it's not an investigative body. This is not primarily what they do. It's not a law enforcement body. That is the mechanism that leaves it in the hands of politicians, people with partisan judgments and inclinations, to both do the questioning and make the ultimate judgment. There's nothing else that's been set up that would allow this to look any different.
Obviously, there's partisanship on both sides as it relates to every confirmation hearing, particularly this one. But I was struck by a few comments, and I'll highlight one from Lindsey Graham, who said they've had tons of time to do this. This has been a drive-by shooting when it comes to Kavanaugh. I'll listen to the lady, but we're going to bring this to a close. Do you get the sense as well that for a lot of senators, maybe not named Murkowski and Collins, that it's almost irrelevant what this woman says, if in fact she says anything on Monday?
It does seem clear that the jury here is not 100 senators. It's 3 or 4 or 5. People like Jeff Flake and the senators like Collins and Murkowski that you mentioned. Maybe some Democrats who might be on the fence about the nomination may be looking to it. But you're right. Most senators, a good number of Democrats, a large number of Democrats, announced their opposition to Kavanaugh even before this allegation came forward. Plenty of Republicans have said that they flat out they believe that he's a good person, and they don't believe the accuser, and they feel like the process where Democrats had this information over the summer, didn't do anything about it until after the hearings, suggested this is all a partisan attack. So I do think that most minds are made up even without this. That's not to say it doesn't matter, because those could be the critical votes, but it's not like every senator is would enter Monday with a totally open mind.
Rick, in terms of motivations for this, I've heard many that, people point out, I think rightfully so, that Merrick Garland's nomination sat for a full year. We only had 8 justices, and there was no rush, that you couldn't operate a court with an even number at the time. But now they say, hey, we got to get this guy seated before the next term for the high court. People also point out that, they don't want this hanging out as an election issue. Moreover, they're worried that more stuff potentially could come out. There's even questions about the finances, or all those documents of which only a fraction went before this committee, or maybe there's another allegation that could come out as well. Why the rush, do you believe, really? Is it they're worried about what might come out additionally, or they want this guy really for the next session of the Supreme Court?
This has been a long-time dream of conservatives, to get that conservative majority on the court. They have it within their grasp. They don't know what's going to happen in this next election. They could lose seats, maybe even control of the Senate, which would mean all bets are off for the next nomination. They feel like the Republicans feel like this is key to delivering on the promise that they made, that President Trump made, the Republican Senate made, and they view it as this process has had time to play out. Kavanaugh's name has been out there for a couple of months. The allegations were in the hands of at least some Democrats for quite some time before they became known publicly just over this past weekend. So, yes, of course, a lifetime appointment taking a little bit more time doesn't seem like a big deal, but there are political considerations, and I think also substantive ones about how the process should play out from the Republican perspective. They had the hearings, they went through the process, and now when this woman came forward, when Dr. Ford came forward, they're giving her the opportunity to testify. They feel like they've done everything that they need to do, and they feel like anything else would be a stalling tactic.
Well, we shall see here, but Rick, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
And for more, I want to bring in tonight's panel, Shelley Mayer, Democratic New York State Senator representing a chunk of Westchester County, Scott Vanderhoff, Rockland County Executive for 5 terms. Now he's co-chairman of the Palestine Institute of Dominican College. Scott's also running for the New York State Senate. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent.
Not running for the
No,
state
not
Senate.
running.
No.
Just running his mouth. No, side kid. So what I'm not kidding about, though, is I have no idea how this is going to play out. And Shelley, the latest machination that may or may not happen is Republicans remembering Anita Hill and remembering that every member of the Republican judiciary in the Judiciary Committee, Republicans, they're all old white guys, that the optics don't look good. So now they're talking about bringing in an independent person to ask the questions, a woman. We don't know who. We don't know if that's definitely the road they're going to go down. But it does seem that Dr. Ford is going to be able to at least call her shots to a certain degree, that she'll pick the day this is going to happen next week. I doubt they're going to say, no, you're not here Monday, you can't do it Tuesday or Wednesday. How do you think this plays out?
Well, I don't know how it plays out. And again, I think a lot of people are less worried about the optics than the experience, her experience. I think many women who are watching weren't around for Anita Hill. They don't remember Anita Hill. And those women have much less tolerance than my generation did for what happened then, which was completely unacceptable. So I think you have a lot of different strands of activism that are going to play. One is, women of my generation saying, wait a minute, this woman should be able to at least have terms that are fair before she goes.
Like what? What do you think she's asking for?
I don't know what she's asking for, and I don't know what her attorney is asking for, more important. But I think this is a huge trauma. She did not really want to get into it. She felt obligated by her civic obligation, credit to her, to stand up and do this. And now she has to figure out the way to do it responsibly and tell her story without, being threatened with her life and having to move and all these things that are happening. I don't think we should underestimate what women and men will say and feel when they hear her story. Forget optics. Nothing disrespectful about your position about it, but it's also how women feel or victims feel about having their story told and being cross-examined and, frankly, today belittled by Republican senators and minimized in their voice. These guys can't help themselves by saying dumb
Lindsey
things.
Graham, I think, wishes he had a different choice of words. But Scott, let's say this plays out next week. She comes across credibly. Kavanaugh comes across. It's the definition of two different versions of the same event without any forensic evidence or anything at this point that we've been presented that will forget about the other person in the room, because there was another person in the room, but it's still going to basically be these two words against each other. If a lawmaker's going in saying that he has the bona fides to be a judge, is there enough to change someone's mind? If you're a Susan Collins, you're a Murkowski, and this is an audience pretty much of 2 or 3 people.
Well, I think that's right. There are about 2 or 3 people that really could sway this either way, and I think the Republicans are on a real problem, because recognizing that he hasn't spoken about this yet. Okay, so there's a quick judgment which says she's obviously telling the truth, because she wouldn't have come through with like this. It's a very difficult for her to do. We haven't heard his side of the story, but either way, this puts, I think, a real damper on what would have been a jurist who most legal scholars and legal folks felt was a good one. And the real question becomes, I think, almost the hearing becomes in its own self, but your question about does he actually get approved? Does that then stay with him for the rest of his career if he were approved? And who voted for him? The Republicans are taking it, in my opinion, way too lightly. I mean, they're it's kind of a, let's just get this over with.
Andrew, somebody made a point today, I think it was a good one. Our friend Rick Glasio, who's been on this program many times, I'm sure when he thought about that moment when he was going to put the paper in front of Hillary Clinton at that Senate debate, it sounded good in theory, but when you did it on TV, it looked awful. I'm sure there's some people thinking, all right, we've got this, and it won't play well potentially. Now, who knows what happens at all, but this thing's fraught with peril. And I think for both sides, by the way, I think if Democrats overplay their hands and just go, overboard on Kavanaugh, then I think that there's a potential here that they'll
I disagree. I think Democrats are looking for a slowdown here, and they're looking for thoroughness in the name of thoroughness. I mean, let's be honest. The real rationale behind what the Democrats are doing is they would like to delay this vote as long as possible and ideally push it until after the midterm elections. That puts even more political pressure on Kavanaugh and on the White House. But they have a legitimate ground for asking for more caution and a more thorough job.
They're not getting an FBI probe.
They're probably not. But I also think that, Dr. Ford may come to Congress tomorrow or next week with an affidavit of a friend of hers who can corroborate or partially corroborate her story, or with something else that sort of leads this to continue. Hey, there's more to this story. Republicans are trying to set up a he said, she said because they think they can win on a he said, she said. Nobody's really going to know what happened.
Yeah. But can I just say, first place, there was a third person there. They should subpoena him.
According to her claim, there was a third person there.
Well, he does not deny he was present. He said he doesn't recollect the incident, if I have his words correct. They have the power to subpoena him. They ought to subpoena him. If they determine this happened, this is a disqualifying event, in my opinion, and I think many people would agree, including Republicans who have said so.
But I think, to say that the Democrats are all this very sincere and want to get to the bottom of this.
This is politically motivated in
political
every
as it
single
gets.
corner. This is with politics completely on both sides.
Well,
All right.
look, there's no secret that many Democrats, myself included, did not think he should be confirmed. Who knew about this?
No.
I mean, maybe someone did.
90% of the paperwork that still has transparency. This is not Exhibit A for how this thing has worked here, and the thing's been
background?
rushed. That all said here, there's a lot of agendas at play, and it's fascinating to see if it'll happen, and if it does, what it will look like. I think it'll be one of those moments where you won't forget. All right, when we come back, the fall of Andrew Cuomo's closest aide from the governor's side to 6 years in federal prison. Will that be enough to send a message to Albany? Dominic, live at the courthouse for the latest.